Welcome to the Modise Network. The past few weeks have been a testing time for South Africa's sense of stability. There have been sporadic eruptions of violence accompanied by the looting of foreign nationals' shops in parts of Tshwane and Joburg. The attack of the police by the foreign nationals did not help matters either. In the midst of all of this, a young student at University of Cape Town disappeared, and following a frantic search, Uyinene Mkhwejana was found murdered. She had been raped before getting killed by an employee of the post office, Luyanda Botha. And this led to protests and demonstrations to highlight the terror and fear that women live with on a daily basis. The statistics suggest that a woman is killed every 3 hours, and most of the crimes are committed by perpetrators known to the victims. What is wrong with our nation? Is it our socialization, cultural beliefs, or an incompetent state that leads to what has been declared a national crisis by President Cyril Ramaphosa? I'll be talking to the Deputy Minister of Justice, John Jeffrey, about the attacks on foreign nationals as well as the scourge of gender-based violence. I will be joined by Mangwiro Tsanga, who is Regional Campaigns and Advocacy Specialist from Sonke Gender Justice, and Mbalenhle Matandela, who's researcher at the Center for the Study of Violence and Reconciliation. And I'll conclude the show with a discussion on the performance of the economy and the role of small and medium-sized businesses in building an inclusive economy with Tebogo Khas, who represents the SMME Forum. But first, John Jeffrey. I'm now joined by the Deputy Minister of Justice, Mr. John Jeffrey, to look at the two major events of the past few weeks. First, the violence against foreign nationals in the cities of Tshwane and Joburg. And second, the increasing abuse and murders of women in the country. And the statistics speak for themselves. And the highlight that led to the demonstrations outside the Cape Town Convention Center earlier this week was the disappearance and the ultimate murder of Uyinene Mkhwejana, a student at the University of Cape Town. And of course, we send our condolences to her friends and family. A very, very tragic end to a young and promising life. We ask you to be part of our conversation, and you can do so on social media platforms. The hashtag is the Modise Network. The Deputy Minister of Justice is Mr. John Jeffrey, and welcome, Mr. Jeffrey.
Thanks for having me, Tim, and I'm sorry that I can't be with you in the studio in Joburg.
Well, of course, these are very painful times. There's a lot of tension in the nation at this time, but the general atmosphere and view of South Africans is that people feel let down by the authorities, especially when it comes to what was known to be a situation waiting to explode, the tensions between the foreign nationals and South Africans on one hand, and of course, the ever-increasing scourge of the abuse and murder of women in our nation. How do you feel, being part of the government? Is it reasonable for South Africans to feel let down by the authorities, you think?
Look, let me just say it's been a very bad week, and I think we need to separate out the two issues of the attacks on foreigners and gender-based violence and femicide, rape and femicide. But let me just start with the attacks on foreigners. I mean, the problem is people taking the law into their own hands, and that has escalated the problems, the tensions. It's important that people do use the criminal justice system and rely on the criminal justice system. With both the attacks on foreigners and the issue of the attacks on women, the law is there. It can be improved, the system. We can always make it better. But what is important is for people to use it.
Well, I agree with you that let's separate the issues, but let's start first with the question of the foreign nationals, right? And the mayor of Joburg, Herman Mashaba, has repeatedly raised this matter with provincial and national government, and he's been complaining that he's not being listened to and that he's not getting any useful response from the national government. And of course, people have also been complaining, and they've decided that they should take the law into their own hands, obviously something that we cannot promote. But it is happening because people feel let down by the authorities. For instance, in Tshwane, in Pretoria, when the taxi drivers complained about the drug dealing that was happening openly in the streets of Pretoria, they said that the police were not responding to their complaints, and that is why they took matters into their own hands.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, if that was happening, that is a problem. And that needs to be attended to by government. The problem, though, often is that, not so much in Tshwane, but in other parts of Gauteng, is that criminal elements get involved and take over. So not all of the shops that were looted were owned or run by foreign nationals, but also South African shops. But yes, where the police are not performing their job properly, that is a problem, and that needs to be taken up.
But how is it going to be taken up? It needs to be taken up, and we have heard of cases where the police themselves seem to be on the payroll of some of the criminal elements within the foreign nationals community.
People who have evidence of that or who have information on that must report it. Yes, there is a problem with all sectors of society with regard to corruption. You had on this recent raid in Johannesburg some of the police who were involved in the raid being arrested for stealing the stealing the property that was taken from the shopkeepers. So yes, it is a problem, but people must report it.
And there's complaints about fake goods being sold at some of the businesses of the foreign nationals. And of course, two questions arise as a result of that. That it seems like we've got poor border controls and thus leading to the influx of undocumented immigrants into South Africa and the pressures that the depressed communities feel. And on the other hand, the fact that the customs seems to be hobbled or unable to monitor the movements of goods into and out of South Africa?
Well, I think the issue is that they do monitoring as they would with counterfeit goods and drugs, but unfortunately drugs still come in. So those are obviously areas that need to be improved. With the issue of undocumented migrants, yes, we've got a long border. And other countries, for example, the President of the United States wants to build a wall on their border with Mexico because of people slipping through. So borders are notoriously difficult to control. We are looking at improving the situation with this legislation that's currently in Parliament on the establishment of a border management agency. So the intention of that is to tighten controls on the border.
Do we have a sense of how many immigrants, migrants that we have in South Africa? Do we know, and do we know where they are located?
I don't have those figures. I remember, though, when it came to the special dispensation for Zimbabweans, where government encouraged Zimbabweans to register and that they could then stay in the country for a certain number of years. I'm told that most Zimbabweans did register, and the number ended up being significantly lower than what was speculated. That is another problem often, that often sort of fake news stories or incorrect information get circulated around. And then I think also the other point to make is that other countries on the continent, Ghana and Nigeria in particular, in the history, have also had incidents where the numbers of immigrants became too many, and the response of the government was to expel those immigrants. So that happened in Ghana in 1968, I think it was, or 69, and in Nigeria in 1983. And it was nationals of the other country that were expelled. So yes, there is a problem, particularly when the economy is bad, with people venting their frustrations on foreign migrants.
I suppose the other thing that South Africans are battling with is the fact that government is not giving a clear indication on where it stands on this matter. It's not new, really, the explosion of the violence that we've seen recently. It's something that's happened in the past. But having said that, the nations that you mentioned, particularly Nigeria, has responded to South Africa saying that, and even the nationals there have responded to South Africa, forcing the businesses owned by South African companies to close down. And the government also suggesting that there might be a tit for tat that will follow up. Where does the South African government stand on this?
Look, I think government has been quite clear on the issue, and that is that basically the law must be enforced, all foreign migrants are not involved in crime, all foreign migrants are not saints. They reflect probably the similarities as with the rest of the population as far as the involvement in crime. But where people are involved in crime, those crimes need to be investigated and action needs to be taken to deal with that. So yes, where there are problems with policing, that needs to be dealt with, that needs to be improved. And then, as I said, as far as border controls, the intention is to establish a border management agency to be responsible for our borders and what comes in and what goes out.
And that is the intention. Do we have any sense of when that is going to be carried out?
Look, the border management bill is in Parliament. It was passed by the National Assembly. It was left in the NCOP in the last Parliament and will be revived. I think there were some issues relating to who was responsible for customs services, but I understand those have been resolved and the bill should then be passed soon and the agency set up.
Let's come to the question of violence or gender-based violence and femicide, as we call it now, taking place in South Africa, right? This is a threat, a terror that women live with on a day-to-day basis, and the statistics are horrible compared to other countries. We learn that a woman gets killed in South Africa every 3 hours or so, and of course the attacks can come from anywhere, and some of the abuses are at the hands of perpetrators who are known to these women. What do you think is going on in our society?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think what is happening is horrific. I think we are in a crisis. We generally have too high a murder rate anyway. I think it's about 16,000 men that were killed last year and just over 3,000 women. But it is a huge problem. As far as femicide, killing of women, and violence against women, rapes and issues like that, I think we've also got to look at ourselves as a society and look at what is going wrong in South Africa. Why do men have these attitudes that they can own women's bodies and they're entitled to sex from them even if the women don't want to have sex with them? So I think those are all things that we need to look at as a society. I think all men in South Africa need to confront these issues and we need to ask ourselves, what are we doing to deal with the issue amongst other men? But I would say, yes, we are in a huge problem.
And of course, the potential victims, and I think this explains why the demonstrations took place outside Parliament and the Cape Town Convention Centre earlier this week. It's because people feel that the authorities are not doing enough to secure or give victims a sense of comfort that the authorities are in charge of the situation.
Yes, there is a huge amount of anger, and that anger is understandable. I think, though, that the facts are that many people do get prosecuted for rape and for murder of women, for femicide, and the sentences that are imposed are very, very heavy.
I'm talking to Mr. John Jeffrey, the Deputy Minister of Justice, and we will be continuing our conversation talking about gender-based violence and femicide in a short while when we return. And, of course, we'd like to hear views from you. The hashtag is the Modise Network.